Caligula. Caligula ruled Rome for less than 4 years, and by the end of it, senators were writing their wills before every single visit to his palace. The sickly, unremarkable 24-year-old who inherited the empire in 37 AD wasn't always this way. Romans initially celebrated his rise, relieved to be free of his predecessor's final, paranoid years. Then, 7 months into his reign, a mysterious illness nearly killed him. He survived. Whatever came back didn't resemble the man who went in. He allegedly declared war on the sea itself, ordering Roman soldiers to march to the shoreline and stab the ocean waves with their swords, then collect seashells afterward as spoils of conquest to present to the Senate. He reportedly planned to make his favorite horse, Incitatus, a Roman consul, complete with marble stable, an ivory manger, a jewel collar, and servants to attend it at his own dinner table. He forced senators to run alongside his chariot for miles through the streets in full formal dress. He staged mock executions purely to watch the terror on his victims' faces before deciding, often at the very last second, whether to actually kill them, and reportedly told one man being tortured to strike him so he could feel that he was dying. In 41 AD, the Praetorian Guard, the very men paid to protect him, cornered him in a palace corridor and stabbed him 30 times. Nobody stepped in. His infant daughter was killed in the same purge, her head reportedly smashed against the wall to make absolutely sure no heir survived him. Nero inherited Rome in his teens, and by his 20s, he'd already tried to murder his own mother 3 separate times. The first 2 attempts failed spectacularly, including a self-sinking boat built specifically to drown her at sea that fell apart while she simply swam to shore, forcing him back to the drawing board. The 3rd attempt didn't fail. Soldiers stabbed her to death on his orders, and Nero reportedly examined her body afterward, commenting on which parts of her figure he found most striking, a detail so disturbing that even hostile Roman historians recorded it with visible discomfort. In 64 AD, a fire tore through Rome for 6 days straight, destroying roughly 70% of the city, and rumors spread that Nero started himself to clear space for a new palace, allegedly playing music while he watched the flames from a tower. The origin, however embellished, of the phrase fiddling while Rome burns. Needing someone to blame, he chose Rome's small Christian population, subjecting them to executions so theatrical that even Romans accustomed to public violence reportedly found it excessive, burning them alive as human torches to light his garden parties. Feeding others to wild animals in the arena. He died at 30, forced into suicide as the Senate turned on him, reportedly muttering, "What an artist dies of me," as a servant helped him cut his own throat, unable to finish the job on his own. Ivan the Terrible. Ivan IV of Russia watched his wife die under suspicious circumstances in the 1560s, and became instantly convinced the entire Russian nobility had poisoned her. His response was an investigation. It was the Oprichnina, a personal police force dressed head to toe in black, riding black horses, carrying severed dog heads and brooms strapped to their saddles as a symbol of hunting down and sweeping away his enemies, granted total legal immunity for whatever they did in his name. Entire towns were razed on his order. In the city of Novgorod alone, over a single winter in 1570, historians estimate somewhere between 1,500 and 60,000 people were tortured and killed, a range so wide because record keepers were too terrified of Ivan to count precisely. Victims were reportedly thrown into the frozen river attached to sleds while the ice was broken around them. In 1581, during an argument over his pregnant daughter-in-law's clothing, Ivan struck his own son, an heir with an iron-tipped staff, delivering a blow to the head that killed the young man days later. Wiping out his own bloodline succession in a single moment of fury, he reportedly regretted so completely that he refused food for days afterward, dying himself just 3 years later, reportedly while setting up a chessboard. Vlad the Impaler. Vlad III of Wallachia returned from Ottoman captivity in the 1450s and brought back a method of execution that would define his entire reign and eventually inspired Dracula himself. His signature punishment involved driving a long wooden stake through a victim's body, angled to avoid immediately fatal organs, then raising it upright so death came slowly, sometimes over days, in full public view. One infamous account describes an invading Ottoman army retreating after Vlad's forces marched through the night specifically to arrange thousands of impaled corpses along the roadside and greet them with the sight at dawn. He reportedly invited the poorest and most infirm citizens of his own capital to a lavish feast, then locked the doors and burned the building down with everyone inside, reasoning he'd rather eliminate poverty than manage it. Estimates of his total victims range from 40,000 to 100,000 people, a staggering figure for a small medieval territory whose total population likely never exceeded 500,000. He was eventually killed in battle, and his head was reportedly sent to the Ottoman Sultan as a trophy, mounted and preserved as proof the threat was finally gone. Idi Amin. Idi Amin seized power in Uganda in 1971 and spent the next 8 years turning the country into a personal killing ground. He awarded himself the title Conqueror of the British Empire, despite Uganda never fighting Britain directly, alongside a self-granted official title running over 30 words long. He claimed on live television to keep the severed heads of political rivals in his own refrigerator, a claim later partially corroborated by witnesses after his fall from power. Amnesty International estimates up to 500,000 Ugandans were killed under his rule, their bodies dumped into the Nile River in such numbers that hydroelectric dam workers reportedly had to periodically clear corpses from the turbines. In 1972, he expelled the country's entire Asian minority population, roughly 80,000 people, many of whose families had lived in Uganda for generations, with just 90 days to leave, seizing their businesses and property overnight, and gutting the national economy in the process. He reportedly sent Queen Elizabeth II a telegram suggesting she visit Uganda to see how a real country was run. He fled into exile in 1979 and lived out the rest of his life comfortably in Saudi Arabia, never once facing trial for what he'd done. King Herod the Great. Herod ruled Judea under Roman authority in the 1st century BC. He spent his final years so consumed by fear of losing his throne that he executed members of his own family on mere suspicion. He had his own wife, Miriam, whom he reportedly loved deeply, killed on unproven accusations of conspiracy, then was said to call out her name in grief for years afterward, while continuing to execute her surviving relatives one by one. He had 3 of his own sons strangled or executed once he became convinced they were plotting to succeed him early. The Roman Emperor Augustus, upon hearing about it, reportedly remarked that it was safer to be Herod's pig than his own son, since Jewish dietary law at least protected the pig from being eaten. Ancient sources describe him ordering the execution of every male infant in Bethlehem under the age of 2 after learning of a prophesied rival's birth, an event modern historians debate as unverified by outside Roman records, but which fits a documented pattern of paranoia so severe that on his deathbed, he reportedly ordered a stadium full of respected citizens executed the moment he died, purely to guarantee that somebody in Judea would actually be mourning that day. That final order was never carried out. Genghis Khan, a boy named Temujin, abandoned by his own clan as a child after his father was poisoned, grew up to build the largest contiguous land empire in human history, largely through a level of calculated brutality that dwarfed nearly everything that came before it. Cities that surrendered peacefully were frequently spared. Cities that resisted were made examples of on a scale almost impossible to comprehend. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire in the 1220s is estimated by some historians to kill several million people across Central Asia, with entire irrigation systems deliberately destroyed in cities like Merv and Urgent, essentially erased from the map within days. He was reportedly quoted telling his generals that the greatest happiness a man could know was crushing his enemies, seeing them fall at his feet, and taking their horses and possessions. Unlike almost everyone else in this video, Genghis Khan died peacefully of illness at the height of his power, having built a legal and governing system stable enough to outlast him for generations, an uncomfortable footnote to a legacy built on some of the deadliest military campaigns ever recorded. King Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold never once set foot in the Congo, yet turned it into his own personal, privately owned colony purely for profit. Not a colony of Belgium in the nation, but his literal private property. To meet impossible rubber production quotas, his private army adopted a brutal enforcement method. Soldiers had proved they hadn't wasted bullets hunting by bringing back a severed human hand for every bullet fired, a policy that led soldiers to cut off the hands of the living, including children, whenever they ran short hands from the dead. Villages that failed rubber quotas were burned outright. Estimates of the total death toll under his personal rule between 1885 and 1908, through killing, disease, and forced labor, ranged as high as 15 million people. Most historians settle around 10 million, roughly half the region's population at the time. Leopold funded parks and monuments across Brussels with the profits, and only relinquished control of the territory after international outcry, driven significantly by journalists who published photographic evidence in severed hands, made the arrangement too politically embarrassing to continue. Idi Amin ruled the impoverished Central African Republic, and in 1976, decided the title of president no longer suited him. Inspired directly by Napoleon, he crowned himself Emperor Hoxha, the first in a ceremony cost an estimated $20 million, roughly a third of the entire country's annual budget, complete with solid gold throne shaped like an eagle and a crown holding 2,000 diamonds. While his citizens starved, Hoxha reportedly kept crocodiles at his palace specifically to dispose of political enemies, and multiple former staff members later testified at allegations that he served human flesh to unsuspecting dignitaries, but he was ultimately acquitted of those specific cannibalism charges at trial, even while convicted of murder and other atrocities. In 1979, after school children protested the uniform policy that profited his own clothing business, up to 200 children were arrested, and dozens are believed to have died in custody, some allegedly at his own direct hand. French paratroopers removed him from power within a year. Francisco Macias Gima gave him a rule Equatorial Guinea through a paranoia so extreme that his own advisors invented excuses just to leave meetings, because he banned the word intellectual from being spoken in his presence. He shut down country schools entirely, banned boats along the coast to stop anyone from escaping by sea, and outlawed the press. Over roughly a decade in power, he is believed responsible for deaths to execution, starvation, or exile of somewhere between a third and half of its own country's entire population, one of the highest proportions of any regime in modern history. On Christmas Day in 1975, he had 150 political opponents executed inside the National Stadium, while a loudspeaker played a pop song on repeat throughout the entire killings. He was overthrown and executed by firing squad in 1979 by his own nephew, Elagabalus. Crowned Emperor of Rome at just 14, Elagabalus' 4-year reign became so notorious for excess that later historians treated it as almost a parody of imperial madness. He reportedly staged elaborate dinner parties where ceilings released avalanches of flower petals thick enough to suffocate unlucky guests underneath, an event some ancient sources described as an actual fatal accident. He allegedly appointed officials based purely on physical attributes, married and divorced 5 times his short reign, including one marriage to a Vestal virgin that scandalized Rome to its core and reportedly offered vast sums to any physician who could surgically change his anatomy. His own grandmother, recognizing the political danger his behavior posed, orchestrated his removal, and at 18 he was assassinated by his own Praetorian Guard, his body dragged through Rome's streets and thrown into the Tiber River, an ending almost identical to Caligula's, a century and a half earlier, at the hands of the very same branch of guard. Enver Hoxha. Hoxha ruled Albania for over 40 years, and as the decades wore on, his fear of foreign invasion turned into a literal national construction project. Convinced NATO or the Soviet Union might invade at any moment, he ordered the building of an estimated 750,000 concrete bunkers scattered across the entire country, roughly one for every 3.5 citizens, enough concrete to have housed the population instead. He severed ties with the Soviet Union, then China, leaving Albania almost completely isolated from the outside world by the 1970s. In 1967, he banned religion outright, making Albania the first officially atheist state on earth, demolishing mosques and churches, and imprisoning clergy of any faith. His secret police built a network so dense that an estimated 1 in 3 adults acted as an informant at some point, and roughly 100,000 people passed through labor camps in a country whose population never exceeded 3 million. He died peacefully of natural causes in 1985, one of the very few names in this video, who simply died of old age. His bunkers left scattered across the landscape decades later, a strange monument to a threat that never actually came. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor to unify China, became consumed in his later years by an obsession with his own mortality that reshaped the ancient world nearly as much as his conquest did. He funded expeditions of hundreds of young men and women sent across the sea to retrieve a mythical elixir of eternal life, none of whom historians believe ever returned. He regularly consumed pills made of mercury, prescribed by court alchemists who believed the shimmering metal held life-extending properties. Pills that almost certainly poisoned him slowly and are widely believed to have caused the very death he was desperately trying to avoid. Terrified assassination, he reportedly slept in a different one of several decoy palaces each night, telling no one which he'd chosen. When he died in 210 BC while traveling, his advisors concealed his death for weeks, propping his body in his carriage and transporting carts of rotting fish alongside it specifically to mask the smell of decomposition. His tomb, discovered only in 1974, remains partially unexcavated, guarded by over 8,000 individually unique terracotta soldiers, and according to ancient accounts, surrounded by rivers of actual liquid mercury built into the floor. A detailed modern soil testing around the site has found abnormally high mercury levels that seem to genuinely corroborate. Saparmurat Niyazov. Niyazov ruled the isolated Central Asian nation of Turkmenistan for over 15 years and built one of the strangest personality cults of the modern era almost entirely out of pure personal vanity. He renamed the days of the week and months of the year after himself and members of his family, so that January became Turkmenbashi, his own self-given title meaning leader of the Turkmen, and April was renamed after his mother. He erected a 40-foot gold-plated statue of himself in the capital that rotated throughout the day specifically to always face the sun. He wrote a 2-volume spiritual and moral guide called Runama, made mandatory reading in every school and workplace, and required as a core component of the nation's driving tests, meaning citizens could genuinely fail to get a driver's license without properly answering questions about the president's personal philosophy. He banned opera, ballet, and the circus outright as insufficiently Turkmen, banned beards and gold teeth on television presenters, and banned dogs from the entire capital city because he found their smell offensive. He also reportedly banned car radios and lip-syncing at public concerts by personal decree. He died of a sudden heart attack in 2006, having ruled the country essentially as his own personal branding exercise for a decade and a half. Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-il inherited history's first hereditary communist dictatorship and spent 17 years running one of the most extreme personality cults on earth. State propaganda claimed he never needed to use the bathroom, that he wrote 6 full operas in 3 years, and that he shot 11 holes in one the very first time he ever played golf. Meanwhile, a famine caused largely by his regime's own mismanagement killed an estimated several 100,000 to several million North Koreans in the 1990s, while state media insisted the country was thriving. His network of prison camps still hold an estimated 80,000 to 120,000 people today, with entire families imprisoned across 3 generations for one relative's alleged disloyalty. Conditions multiple United Nations investigations have compared directly to Nazi concentration camps. He was also an obsessive film enthusiast who, in 1978, ordered the kidnapping of a South Korean director and his actress ex-wife specifically to build up North Korea's own film industry, holding them for 8 years before they managed to escape during a trip abroad. He died of a heart attack on a train in December 2011, and power passed seamlessly to his son, ensuring the dynasty and the propaganda continued into a 3rd generation, Pol Pot. Pol Pot marched into Cambodia's capital in 1975 and attempted something almost no other leader in history has tried, erasing modern civilization and resetting the calendar to year 0. Cities were emptied within days. Entire hospitals evacuated mid-surgery. Money was abolished entirely. The National Bank was dynamited. Anyone wearing glasses, speaking a foreign language, or having soft hands untouched by manual labor was identified as an intellectual threat and executed on the spot. Family units were dissolved in favor of loyalty to the state alone, with children encouraged to report their own parents. Over the next 4 years, an estimated 1.5 to 2 million Cambodians, roughly a quarter of the entire country, died from execution, starvation, or forced labor. Pol Pot himself died quietly in a jungle hut in 1998 of apparent heart failure, just days after his own former comrades agreed to hand him over for an international war crimes trial, escaping any courtroom accountability entirely. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more like it, and drop a suggestion for the next one in the comments.